Every HR professional wants an inclusive culture, but what does that really mean? And what practical steps can you take to make it happen? This is the Culture Clinic, where my co-founder Joe and I are relentlessly learning from HR experts on how to build a culture where people love to work. My name is Skai, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Guusto. And today I'm joined by Shelley DaCosta, an HR expert in the rewards and recognition space. Shelley, I'm hoping that you can point us in the right direction with this week's topic. What does inclusive culture really look like? What do you need to feel a sense of belonging at work?
So for myself personally, it's all around feeling heard, accepted, safe to be who I am and express my ideas. That's pretty much it. Like for me, then I feel like I belong because people are listening to me. I can be me, who I really am, and I can express how I feel about things and be listened to. That's important.
I can be me with the snapping at the fingers and what.
Instead of people laughing at how much I'm talking. No. But, let's be honest, like we all look for, it's innate in human nature to look for a mirror image in our workplace, to look for people that look or act or are like us. Unfortunately, that's the case. And so we unfortunately attach safety to that, right? I could approach it as, oh my gosh, I'm sitting in this meeting and am I the oldest person in the room? Is my skin the darkest? Am I the only person in the meeting with an accent? What, oh my goodness, my boss's body language, every time I speak, it looks all dismissive. What am I, That unfortunately is that inherent bias with people, and then it makes people feel unsafe if we don't see others like ourselves. But we need to feel safe and appreciated regardless of all of that because we're unique and different. That's much more diversity versus inclusive culture. That makes sense.
It almost seems like they're kind of at odds with each other, right? Kind of like you go to the other end of that spectrum where you've got full diversity and everybody's different. Then you walk into the room and you don't see anybody that kind of reflects who you might kind of feel that you are. And you don't have that feeling of kind of safety and inclusivity.
Well, I think it's for you to feel safe despite the fact that everybody's different. Right? So to be on a call, be the oldest person on the call, or the person with the darkest complexion on the call, and know that doesn't matter to the people that I'm speaking to, that I will still be heard and listened to. That's the key. That we can be all diverse and I would still feel safe. And that my safety is not looking for other people exactly like me in the workplace. My safety just comes from knowing I'm appreciated for who I am, gray hair and all.
And so is that what having an inclusive culture means to you kind of personally?
I think so. Yeah. It's a culture where there are conscious efforts, behaviors, policies, even norms to make everyone feel seen and heard and valued with their unique differences, so that you're safe. You're constantly growing, changing, and learning from one another in that kind of an environment because you're different.
Yeah. And so as HR leaders, what are some strategies that we can kind of utilize to help kind of create that culture of inclusivity?
Yeah. I think we have to understand inclusivity is the how, right? And diversity is the what, right? So you have to have the how before the what. You have to have inclusivity and that inclusive culture before diversity is going to naturally happen, right? And HR needs, well, it's not just HR, the organization, but what HR can do is help create a culture where we're learning, listening, we're making those conscious efforts, we're rethinking all of our practices, behaviors, policies. We're acknowledging and promoting learning from one another all the time. And in particular, we're helping leaders to grow and learn and understand things like inherent bias.
And so would you kind of offer lunch and learns, or how would you go about kind of training leaders?
Yeah, there's so many different ways. I think part of it is just doing that deep dive with the leaders about their own biases and getting past saying, I have no biases. I'm not about you, right? But it's looking at the people. I heard a great podcast the other day where somebody was talking about, Naomi was talking about the people that you look to outside of your family to help you with problems in your life, to answer questions, to learn from, etc. Are they diverse? And 9 times out of 10, somebody will say, I'm very inclusive. But when they look to that group, they're like, but my group of friends and confidence and in my circle aren't that. So it's understanding that you need to broaden that and find out where people are coming from. And so how you do that, does a lunch and learn do that? It can help. Like, I think it's just, there's a multitude of training that needs to happen for leaders to understand it, because one leader is going to understand it differently than another leader, or have an opinion on their own biases different from another leader. And some are going to be able to relate to it right away if they themselves have felt bias against them. And so then that's a great leader to have on a steering committee to talk about what that feels like and what it means, and how unsafe they've felt in past workplaces, and what's different about this workplace, why they do feel safe. And it might be just by the very virtue of calling it out and discussing it, and knowing that they're still, asked for the questions, etc. There is lots to be said for work groups and meetings and celebration days. Lots of companies will have diversity lunches and sessions to recommend, a certain day or whatever it is that's important for them to learn and grow about. And I don't think it's like, okay, we've got a project about diversity and it's going to start here, we're going to finish it here. It's never going to end. It's always going to be learning and growing and teaching and promoting inclusivity.
And one thing that you kind of mentioned there on kind of employee groups, would you ever be intentional about trying to kind of help managers and leaders switch or like project groups? So like, we'll have a few different employees kind of working on this project, but then we're going to kind of switch it out and want, some of those employees join some of these employees so that you can get a bit more of a diverse experience.
Absolutely. I've seen an organization where we actually partnered people up and hit them with some of the tough questions, like whether it was, at an offsite or a working session, so to speak, of training and learning, and being pretty,
Yeah, like what's a tough question that you would ask?
being intentional about pairing people up and having them each respond to one another or interview one another about their backgrounds and their experiences, and throw in there a question of, do you ever feel that you have been discriminated against in the workplace, and how did that feel? And you've got, two quite different people answering that question and interviewing one another about how that feels, and then potentially repeating that back to the group on what they found out or what they learned. That could be pretty empowering, because it's a little bit about how do you have somebody walk in someone else's shoes.
Yeah. It's tough, right? Because it's an entire kind of like lived experience,
right? And it goes so far back, and there's so many pieces that we don't know because we didn't live that experience, because we don't have that experience. We don't have that. Our family, culture, values, the things we heard, the stories our grandparents told us were quite different from the stories that individuals' grandparents told them. And you don't know, just like we don't know each other's triggers for mental health, we don't always know each other's triggers for feeling safe and inclusive.
So thinking back on your experience, Shelley, all the different organizations that you worked at, was there one organization that like really stood out in terms of creating a very kind of like psychologically safe environment? And what was it that, because this all starts at the leadership level. So like, what was it that the leaders at the top were doing right to kind of make that sort of environment?
I thought about this one in the sense of, is our global organizations ahead of the game only by virtue of them being global and hiring employees from all around the world, hopefully from many different cultures. But it didn't always go hand in hand. So I would say diversity from a cultural perspective at IKEA was wonderful. It was amazing. There was just so many different languages and customs and behaviors, and it was just the cultural and gender diversity was ahead of the game, if you will, or ahead of many other organizations when I joined there. But then they would still have somebody make a decision that you'd think, that's not, you know what I mean? That doesn't make somebody feel very safe, the way you just treated them in that meeting or how you just spoke to them. And that comes down to that individual not having the awareness, that individual not being trained, and that individual being promoted to a senior leader. Because, all that great work before is kind of undone when now the person that treats somebody that way is at the senior leadership. Like that can be a problem. I've seen another organization where the head of diversity initiatives didn't get it themselves. And so the whole program was put at risk. Like I said, there's so many things we don't know, we haven't experienced. But I find that talking to one another, that one of the best sessions I went on was actually that same organization where we talked about inherent bias in the workplace and had a session where people were trying to be very, very honest. And we talked about where we learn about diversity, inclusivity, in particular inclusivity. And I remember at the time, for me, it was learning from my kids, because I had adult kids at the time. And both my husband and I, it would be challenging, but we would love to have these conversations with our university-age children around their friends and why they would use this term versus that term and why they would identify this way and what that meant. And it was just so empowering to learn this, and there's a term for it. It's called upward mentoring, that, you learn. And I think it's, how do you create a culture in your organization where people, it's not just top-down training. It's not just learning from lunch and learn, or a speaker comes in and talks to us today about inclusivity. It's having all your employees open up their minds to learning, growing, and taking every opportunity, every interaction as an opportunity to learn and grow or ask a question.
Thinking about kind of like being a senior kind of HR leader now and trying to kind of communicate with the rest of the leadership team about the business impact, the importance of inclusivity. Like, why do you believe that inclusivity is important and kind of has an impact? And maybe where in your career did you see that kind of most clearly?
So today, I think we're on a better track where we work on inclusivity, and organizations that aren't effective they're only working on representation, diversity numbers, rather than creating that true culture of inclusivity. They're forgetting about the senior leadership team and what does someone visually or otherwise see at the senior leadership team, and how safe do those senior leadership team members feel. So maybe there's 3 women there, but if you talk to them, they will say, yeah, I chose not to have children because it's just too difficult. I can't be a senior vice president and a mom. It just doesn't work in our culture, in this organization, and openly say that, or I decided to never go into senior management in this organization because I know I can't get to that table. and have children, because the support, the workplace is just not accepting of that kind of thing. So, it's they're not understanding that they also need to represent, they also need to be inclusive. And there's a safety there as well. In fact, it's even harder when that group doesn't feel psychologically safe to challenge one another, because they're making key decisions across the organization. And we're talking inclusivity for everything, whether it is race or culture or gender or sexual orientation or mental health, right? Abilities, all of those kinds of stuff. And that group in particular is very, very focused on the business, and maybe they don't want to understand those individuals' life experiences, where they're coming from, and their thoughts, their beliefs, or actions. It's too complicated. Let's just keep the business running. And not understanding that actually, when you create that inclusive culture and have a diverse workplace, your business runs better. People are more comfortable. People feel they can bring their whole selves. We often say we're really trying to hire the hearts and minds of people. And, your heart's not in it if you're not safe and you're not comfortable, right? The real work, it's easy to just hire. It's much harder to retain, to acknowledge, to grow, to change. It's tough to create an environment where people feel safe.
And so you mentioned that at IKEA, they were fairly kind of successful in kind of creating that environment. What was the impact on kind of employee engagement and retention? And could you draw that direct correlation to kind of inclusivity?
We had engagement scores that were, in the 90%. Even participation engagement scores. Companies that would help us do the voice survey or engagement survey would say, I never see this much participation, but it was because people knew that if they speak up, change would happen, their voice would be heard. There was always a glut, if you will, of applicants, people wanting to work for the company, regardless of what was going on. Otherwise, people wanted to work for IKEA, and it was because others had recommended what a great place it was to work. You were often, and it wasn't that you wanted to hire a friend of a friend of a friend, because that can also be a bit problematic from an inclusivity perspective. But it was because people were so willing to say, it's a great place to work and it's okay. You will be safe here. You will feel comfortable. So very, very diverse from that perspective.
Yeah, I've always felt, because it's the classic kind of NPS question, how likely would you be to recommend somebody to work here, or on customer side for a customer? But the proof is in people actually referring coworkers or actually referring customers, and not, filling out a survey saying hey, I'm a 10 out of 10, but never actually doing this. Here's a bit of an interesting one for you to kind of finish off. Have you ever seen anything that companies do to promote inclusivity that was actually kind of ineffective?
I think I don't know if I can think of a full example, but I think and I don't want to say it's not trying too hard, but it's where it becomes obvious that an organization is going through the motions like a checklist. It's we want the decal on the front door that says top 100 employer this year. So we've written a diversity statement and an inclusivity policy, and that kind of thing. But there's nothing behind it to say, what have you done though? You wrote the policy and you say this is how you believe, but what has really happened otherwise? Can you dig in and show me how that lives in your organization? So how many women are promoted into senior executive positions? How many women of color are promoted into senior executive positions? When you launched mental health in the workplace in terms of support systems and new programs and training for leaders and managers and stuff, I can remember how it felt, similar to your scenario where somebody felt safe, was that people on social media came forward and said they were so grateful for it. And then they would tell their story of how they have struggled with mental health. And I felt like that, okay, this is great because we've created an environment where they feel safe to acknowledge this, to let people know, they were not anonymous. This is who I am, and this is what I struggle with on a daily basis from an awareness perspective. So, I can't think of an exact example other than organizations that are doing it the checklist model. We have to do this because everybody's doing this. We have to do that. We have to do this kind of training. We'll do the lunch and learns, tick, 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 but not really digging in deep and asking the hard questions, because that's too hard. It's awful. People can be upset, et cetera. And so it's almost distasteful to some senior leadership teams to do that, because they want to keep the separation between home and work, and at work everybody should be the same. And it's like that's not an effective inclusive culture at all.
And so it strikes me, and maybe you did this throughout your career, but this would be somewhere where HR folks would really benefit from kind of having some case studies and being able to kind of like point to, maybe they didn't have the experience of working at IKEA, but there are articles written about kind of how IKEA kind of went to lengths to actually kind of create an inclusive culture and what the impacts were in terms of number of applicants, retention numbers, and whatnot. Because senior leaders might, to your point, might be uncomfortable with some of this stuff.
How do we learn from that? How do we learn from others who've gone forward and put some good programs in place or gotten to where they need to get to? How do we share that knowledge and that learning from one another? Because some organizations have some really great leaders at the top that can kind of model that behavior and tell their story and think that way. And then there's others that it's just, you're still astounded by some of the things you read in the news about organizations. And, you spend some time Googling an organization and looking for human rights complaints geared at that organization. And you start to kind of see what's below the surface, and you think, oh my goodness, what's going on? Because it's uncomfortable.
Well, I've learned a tremendous amount here today. Thank you, Shelley, as always, for kind of taking the time. And did you have any kind of major takeaway from kind of the conversation that you'd like to kind of leave folks with?
It's tough to create that environment where people feel safe and feel that they can bring their whole selves to work. So many behaviors in the workplace are good business practice behaviors, if we will, or what we applaud are business thinking, so to speak. And often they kind of run contrary to really thinking about where someone is coming from and one that they can bring to the table. And that takes time, you know what I mean, to actually get to know people. I've had leaders turn around and say, goodness, my employees take up so much time when I have to do these one-on-ones, ask them about their kids and ask them how they're feeling and that. I'm like, oh my goodness, that person should not be a leader. They just want to talk about the business and what the person did and did they get their goals done and meet their objectives, etc. And that's it. And here's an employee that needs to express themselves and why, they worked on the weekend because they have to on Monday take 3 children to the doctor, whatever it is. It's a diversity difference of who we are. It's an inclusivity thing for them to feel safe enough and for that leader to want to get to know that employee and that employee to feel heard, even if it's to tell them about their sick child, or even if it's to tell them about an unfortunate situation from their past, whatever it is. Leaders need to be open to that. So that, right? But unfortunately, leaders are applauded too often for business thinking, business this, we've got to achieve this, we've got to achieve that. Whereas if we can take that time and create that environment where people feel safe, then diversity comes from the inclusivity. And then we have better organizations that are more productive. People stay longer, people feel better, rewarded, and they want to work hard.
Yeah, And it kind of makes me think about kind of one-on-ones and just asking people kind of, hey, how was your weekend? And then actually caring about and listening to what they actually say.
It's very sad sometimes in HR when a leader will come to you with, so and so's got all these performance issues going on that they didn't meet this deadline or this isn't happening well. And, they're normally really, really bright, and I get all these great answers. But over the course of the last couple of weeks, this has happened. I think I need to terminate, or we need to go on a performance management, whatever. And you start to say, well, what do you know about what's going on in their life? I don't know. Like, do they have something going on in their life right now, health-wise, family-wise, whatever, that could be impeding, distracting them, causing that? I don't know. And it's like, wow, what do you know about these people that come and spend more time with you than their own families or are online with you? And most of the time spend a lot more time, at least daylight hours, with you than their own families. And you know this much about them. Ask the questions and then listen.
So a takeaway for me there, and shout out to kind of our HR team, Noah and Julia. They do a great job of guiding all of our managers and kind of creating kind of templates for one-on-ones and making sure that we're asking people kind of these questions, right? And learning a little bit about kind of the humans that we're working with every day.
Because you're a people first culture.
We try to be.
You are.
Shelley, as always, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you, Skai.
If you want to build a great place to work, check out Culture is the Ultimate Advantage, our free guide to creating a culture where people feel seen, heard, and valued. Click the link in the description to get your copy. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a future episode. Don't forget to recognize somebody for a job well done today. Guusto.